Okay. Wow. Here we are. Now, words cannot describe the feeling of power I feel when the room goes quiet. But as Spider-Man's Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility. I've actually got an uncle called Ben. He makes great rice. Welcome back to the Churchill Public Speaking Competition Grand Final, now that the ice is broken. Thank you to all of the teachers, students and supporters for being here today. And another massive congratulations to the schools that are here at the Grand Final. I'll just read them out again so that we can really acknowledge their achievements. So we have Churchill College, Hereford Cathedral School, Torquay Girls, Altrincham Grammar, Ibstock Place, Stanford School, and Stanford School. That's the last one. Yes, let's have a round of applause. If you weren't here earlier today, my name is Louis Preston. I will be your MC for the day. We are fortunate also to be joined by a prestigious and experienced panel of judges over at the back, if you turn and have a look at them now. A very intimidating looking bunch. Before I introduce them, you'll also spot the cameras whilst you're turned around, which are also live streaming this event to millions of people watching at home. So this one's for you. So let's start by introducing our chair judge, Simon Bucknell. Simon is an award-winning speaker and public speaking coach who teaches people how to achieve a greater impact with their speaking. A former president of the London Chamber of Commerce and recipient of the Freedom of the City of London, we are honoured to have him with us today. Let's have a round of applause for Simon. Joining Simon on our judging panel is John Ray. John is an award-winning senior correspondent with ITV News. Working across the world from locations such as Johannesburg and Beijing, he is often assigned at the front lines of ongoing conflicts, such as the conflict in Ukraine. We are also delighted to have him join our judging panel today. Lots of awards across the judging panel so far. Next we have Tim Davies, who judged our semi-final earlier and was up on stage. Tim is a lawyer by profession and has been judging with the ESU for 12 years. He's judged for the public speaking competition, which we are here today, and also the international public speaking competition. So welcome, Tim. Another of our experienced judges joining us today is Ella Cox. With over a decade of public speaking experience, Ella served as the youth MP for her constituency at her school and was selected as the reserve speaker for the England World Schools debate team. She's spent the last few years teaching, lending her expertise to classes as far-reaching as South Korea, the United States and Rwanda. Currently, she is studying to become a solicitor before starting her training contract with Freshfields Brookhouse Derringer LLP. I hope I've said that right, Ella. And last but certainly not least, please welcome Scott Lockie, our final judge today. Scott joined the ESU during his years in school, where he developed a passion for public speaking and debate. This passion has extended to his university years, where he's run workshops with Exeter University's Debating Society and attending competitions. Having judged during lockdown and for all rounds of this competition, we welcome Scott to the panel today and thank him for lending his time and expertise. The last time I met Scott, he'd travelled 8 hours to judge for one of our competitions, so he's a very dedicated member of the ESU. So we are honoured to have such a highly experienced panel with such varied education and public speaking experience, who we are sure will give our teams invaluable feedback, no matter what the result today. I'm now going to go over the rules for the ESU-Churchill Public Speaking Competition, but before I do so, for the benefit of those watching at home and for those who might have missed this morning, let me tell you a little bit more about the competition. So 1,500 participants competed this year, over 1,500, and we're down to the last few, so that's quite an achievement in itself that we're now down to you guys here today. The competition's been running for 64 years, and the English Speaking Union was actually chaired by Winston Churchill himself, so it's fitting that we're here today at Churchill College, Cambridge. I also recently found out that the English Speaking Union actually has a UN accreditation as well, so it's a very prestigious organisation that runs a very prestigious competition. So the rules. Each presentation will be 14 minutes in length. The chairperson will begin and have 1 minute for their introduction. Following this, the speaker will present their speech lasting 5 minutes, and after the speech, the questioner will ask their questions to the speaker for 4 minutes, followed by questions from the audience for 2. Please note, if you're affiliated with any of the schools participating, when they are on stage, please do not raise your hand to ask questions. I will bang the gavel right here on 2 occasions. First, when the speaker's 5 minutes have elapsed for their speech, and secondly, when 14 minutes has elapsed for the entire presentation. During the presentation, it will be the responsibility of the chairperson to ensure that timings are being adhered to. A few final rules. We request that phones are switched off for the duration of the presentations. If you wish to use your phone, please step outside the room at the back. And if you wish to make notes on the speeches for the floor questions, please use pen and paper. I also have some final notes from our tech team up the back. Speakers, can I ask you please to speak on the chairs right over here, chairs in the middle and questioners over here. And also you will spot these microphones. If you could please pick them up, clip them onto your lapel, and then make sure to take them off when you leave the stage. We don't want those going home with you, do we? So, judges, are you ready to commence with the first presentation? Excellent. So, I would like to invite the speaker from Churchill College and the chair and questioner from Hereford Cathedral School up for the first presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the grand final of the Churchill Public Speaking Competition. I hope you're all well and eager as I am. My name is Freya Evans, I'm from Hereford Cathedral School, and today I will be chairing this presentation. I would like to begin by introducing our speaker of today, Jessie Lofthouse, from Petersfield Churchill College, who will be speaking on the topic of Sometimes Sorry Isn't Enough. After discussing with Jessie about her speech, I have quite a strong sense that this will be one of eloquent nature due to her sheer knowledge on the topic. The reasoning behind Jessie's decision of picking this motion today was because she feels the topic was more abstract, containing more philosophical elements which she felt were highly engaging and in need of exploration. She also has a passion for acting, and hopefully we will see some of that drama in her speech today. The recent unrest in the post office scandal has led to many necessary apologies being made, posing the importance of this debate, and hopefully Jessie will shed some light on such a relevant dispute. Furthermore, I would like to introduce our questioner, Felix Lawson from Hereford Cathedral School. Now, a friendly reminder, Jessie, you have 5 minutes for your speech, and I'll knock on the table once when 30 seconds remains, and then twice when you need to draw your speech to a close. Now, I don't want to take up any more time or steal too much of the spotlight. I have that effect. So, without further ado, please welcome Jessie to the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen,
It's sad.
so sad. Why can't we talk it over?
Oh, it seems to me that sorry seems to be the hardest word. Elton John, who apparently has lots to apologise for and just can't quite bring himself to do so. Maybe it's just too big a sacrifice, or maybe he just has a cold heart. Your hopes of some words of repentance have been snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Elton, can you feel the love tonight? Sorry, I'll stop now. And there's that word again. Sorry. Imagine every rom-com you have ever watched. 2 people meet, fall in love at a speed that's practically Shakespearean, and it seems that everything is going well until one of them stuffs up. Then cue the apology. Late at night, on hands and knees in the rain in Paris. Well, it's just not good enough, Chad. I'm British, and like many others, the word sorry is ingrained. It's my automatic response when I think I'm in the wrong, which is most of the time. I'm sorry, you appear to have run me over with your car. When we're not just being terribly British about it, though, we apologise because we feel or understand we have made a mistake, and we need to atone.
The philosopher Plato once said that if one has made a mistake and one fails to correct it, you have made an even bigger mistake. In many day-to-day disputes, a simple sorry will bring the issue to a close, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes sorry is not, and simply cannot be enough. The Holocaust is, to this date, one of the worst cases of mass human genocide in the history of mankind. The world bore witness to the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma, people with disabilities, and homosexuals under the Nazi regime, allies, and collaborators. Rabbi Albert Friedlander, in response to a repentant collaborator who came to him asking for forgiveness, said that he could not in fact forgive the man in his role as rabbi. He told him, "You cannot go to the 6 million. They are dead. I cannot speak for them." You have to ask yourself, though, do our words have enough power to absolve someone of something so atrocious? As a child, I recited the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, what happens if we simply can't do that? This was the case for Julie Nicholson. Her daughter was killed when a suicide bomber attacked the London Underground in July 2005. Previously a vicar, Nicholson had to step down because she knew she could not teach forgiveness in the Bible when she was unable of doing so herself. She came to the conclusion that there was nothing that could be said or done to make her forgive those responsible for her daughter's death. Sometimes an action is just too hurtful and nothing can ever lessen the pain. There is a theory in moral philosophy called deontology. This is the idea that the moral worth of an action is determined purely by the intentions of the individual committing the act. The only way for sorry to ever truly be enough is if it's meaningful, genuine. In the Netflix TV show The Good Place, the deceased and formerly morally bankrupt Eleanor Shellstrop has somehow managed to wind up in heaven, a case of mistaken identity. Here she can gain points and redeem herself, putting right what she did wrong in her past. However, she soon realises that her points tally isn't growing, no matter what she does. Frustrated, she comes to the conclusion that this is because her motivation is corrupt. If the meaning isn't there, it simply won't work. Kant, a moral philosopher of the 18th century, said that our desire for forgiveness stems from a need to be relieved of the burden of moral guilt, which we have in response to any mistake we make. Kant acknowledged that guilt is a complex emotion comprised equally of intellectual and affective aspects. Perhaps the only way to fully free ourselves from the burden of guilt is to receive validation in the form of forgiveness. The victim shows the wrongdoer that the moral failing is no longer a burden to them, which triggers a psychological shift in the wrongdoer, and they too no longer feel the burden. So whether subconscious or not, every time we apologise, we are doing it on some level to free ourselves from that gut-wrenching feeling we have in the pit of our stomach after we do something wrong. Tell me you haven't all felt that. So this means that, just like Eleanor Shellstrop, our motivation is and will always be corrupt. So whether we say sorry, or soz, or please, for the love of God, forgive me, Chad, we are the ones who stand to gain. It's never enough. Perhaps old Elton has it the wrong way round, and sorry is actually the easiest word to say. We're often just too quick to use it, and it ends up being devoid of meaning, intent. Well, for those of you left feeling confused by absolutely everything I've said, and potentially on the brink of an existential crisis, I feel I really only have one thing left to say. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was brilliantly articulate, and my knowledge on the philosophy of apologising and the complexities of a genuine apology have been vastly improved. Now, let me pass over to Felix to provide further insight. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Jessie, for that excellent speech. My first question was simply, what are maybe some better alternatives that we could use to show our apologies?
So there was a study done by Harvard in 2018 that said that the 3 elements of a genuine and good apology is that you outline what you've done wrong in the situation, you admit that you acknowledge this, and you make some form of promise to show difference in the future. And I think that the main point of this is that a very good sign of a genuine apology is that you show some change, and you show this through your actions in your day-to-day life. You have acknowledged what you've done was wrong, and you make a promise not to do this again. So I think a good alternative for apologies that could be potentially more comforting for the victim is a physical sign through your actions that you have changed.
Do you think, though, you mentioned about Kantian ethics during your speech, and the way that he argues that at one level all apologies are selfish and that you are trying to get a load off your shoulders. Do you think that a true apology is therefore even really possible?
I think that what we define as a true apology is obviously open to interpretation on some level, but I think an apology can have selfish gain behind it or motivation behind it, but this doesn't in fact lessen its ability to comfort the victim and also provide some form of personal change or growth for the wrongdoer. Because obviously when we apologise, we are seemingly doing it to help the victim of the situation, but it could also in fact help us gain some reflection and learn something from the mistake we've made in the situation. So I think that although maybe a true apology might not be possible because of the Kantian theory that we all always have selfish motivation, I think that apology still can be genuine and a valid point of society.
If we say an apology was genuine and that someone was truly sorry for something, are there maybe situations, you mentioned the Holocaust, are there maybe situations in which it doesn't matter whether they apologise or not, the original action was so bad that they can't really atone for that?
I think there are countless examples throughout history, including conflicts and wars and political disputes, where sorry hasn't actually managed to fix anything and it can't truly be enough, because obviously semantics is the idea that words only have power if we give them power. So the word sorry itself doesn't actually have any meaning. And I think in countless examples, sorry doesn't fully bring the issue to a close, although I do always think it's a good way to help solve conflict.
In that light, do you think it might be more useful, rather than focusing on the apologies, to focus on what caused the problem in the first place that you have to apologise for?
I think that a natural part of an apology is reflecting on what caused the problem and what you did wrong in the situation. And obviously part of an apology and part of working up to an apology on the wrongdoer's part is some form of self-reflection, realising where you've gone wrong. So I think that a natural apology always has some form of reflection on the situation, so it does always force both the wrongdoer and the victim and anyone else involved to reflect on the original cause of the issue.
Do you think that maybe, because today, as you point out, we kind of think of sorry as the apology bit, but do you think maybe perception should be changing and instead we should see the reflection and looking back on stuff as much of the apology as just the word sorry is?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that sorry should be equally weighted on the physical act of apologising and then also the further actions of the wrongdoer, and also the self-reflection and the impact it might have on the wrongdoer by apologising and admitting that they've done something wrong, because obviously it is a big thing for someone to have some form of self-reflection and realise that they're being wrong in a situation. I'm sure a lot of us are quite stubborn and don't often like to admit when we're in the wrong, but I think sorry should be equally weighted on both looking at the past, the present and the future.
Okay, I'm told last question. Just a bit of a general question. Do you think that our overuse of sorry in English, especially as British people, do you think that is actually bad for apologies and that we don't really take sorry to mean very much?
I think that, yeah, it's sort of like the boy who cried wolf, really. If you overuse something too much, it ends up losing its meaning completely. And I do think that particularly British as a culture, and many others as well, do overuse sorry. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because obviously self-reflection is always a good thing, but I do think in some cases we should lessen the use of an apology and save it for bigger issues instead of using it in day-to-day disputes.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but that is time. Wow, what passion and enthusiasm. You raised some really great points there, guys. As many of you, I'm sure, thoroughly enjoyed experiencing such a flourish of mesmerising ideas. Can you believe that saying sorry is arguably meaningless and it struggles to close any form of issue or resolve these problems? Instead, we must take action. To conclude, would anyone on the floor have any additional questions they'd like to ask? Jessie. You over there.
How would you apologise if, say, it was in the past and the person... How would you apologise if the person, it was an action in the past and the wrongdoer isn't actually there to be able to reflect upon the issue or what they've done wrong?
So quite a few people deem an apology as valid if it's accepted, and obviously if in some certain situations, like the Holocaust with Rabbi Albert Friedlander, if the people affected by the situation aren't there to accept the apology, it might be deemed as less valid. But I do still think that apologising, even if you're aware it will never be accepted, and it can't be accepted because the victim either isn't there to give the acceptance or can't validly answer the apology,
I still think that sorry is a really important part of society because it allows us to look inwardly and reflect and provides a positive outcome on society itself.
Cool, okay. Well, I'm deeply grateful for Jessie for sharing her passion on why she feels that apologising is important across society, but sometimes isn't and cannot be enough. She began with an emotional reference to Elton John, very heartbreaking, Jessie. She utilised the theory of deontology, discussing that the worth of something is often found in its meaning and the meaning that we put towards that word. Jessie argued that all throughout history there have been many instances where apologising has been a necessity, yet nowhere near enough. The Holocaust being a namely example, with Jessie exposing the horrors people had to endure and questioning if simply saying sorry would have even the slightest ability to repair any of the damage. Jessie argued that although saying sorry is important, there are many instances where this cannot and will not be enough. Additionally, I'd like to thank Felix for widening our perspective with his undoubted charisma, questioning if a true apology would ever be enough. Further, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to our hosts, Churchill College, our wonderful judges for giving up their precious Sunday, as well as all of you in creating such a brilliant and warm atmosphere. Finally, the Mental Health Foundation states that the biggest fear for the average person is public speaking. Second to that, death. So I think we can all agree with a sigh of relief that we have survived. In fact, I will go further. We've been enhanced and enriched by such a valuable experience. To quote Winston Churchill, attitude is the little thing that makes a big difference. And I feel he could not be more right. The English-speaking union has vastly transformed my confidence and the overall outlook I take. And so, in conclusion, I thank all of you for helping young people discover our voices and making all of this possible. Thank you.
A big thank you, and I'm a little bit giddy actually because those Elton John references have given me something to work with. It's great to see that you're still standing in this competition after all of those rounds. No doubt thanks to the support of your colleagues, but that's what friends are for, I suppose. I really tried hard to get Rocket Man in there, but I couldn't if I tried. So, next up, let's have the speaker from Hereford Cathedral School with the chair and questioner from Torquay Girls Grammar School, please. Thank you.
Now, I had prepared a joke yesterday for today, which I am still unabashedly about to pain you all with. Good afternoon, welcome, and may the 4th be with you. You see, Miles here is a huge fan of Star Wars, like huge, and so when he's not, looking at problems of theoretical physics or daydreaming about Sacramento in California, this seemed the only joke fitting to make. My name is Tallulah Kelly, and I'm feeling as happy as Luke Skywalker right now to be welcoming you all to the ESU Public Speaking Finals. Miles will be arguing today that travel and tourism are exploitative for poorer nations, which I'm sure will make us all really appreciate this wonderful holiday, essentially, to Cambridge. And for us, on a more personal level as a team, knowing that many people view Torquay as the English Riviera, but also that many just define it as John Cleese in Fawlty Towers. And so we do hope you know that we are more than that. We are so much more. So on my left is Rosie Reed, who will be our questioner for today. I'd just like to point out to you, Miles, that you have 5 minutes for your speech, and I will knock on the table when you have 4 minutes left. So without further ado, bonne chance.
Merci beaucoup. Dear audience, perhaps one of the greatest signs of humanity's development is our travel speeds. In our millennia-long collective step on the accelerator, horses were replaced by trains, which in turn were replaced by cars, and now commercial airlines give us the opportunity to traverse continents in a matter of hours. a concept at least as futuristic to someone a few hundred years ago as teleportation or time travel are today. But what effect does all this have? Hours could be spent discussing the effect of travel speeds on the economic system, financial markets, or geopolitics. Luckily for you all, I don't have hours. So let's talk about something a little more engaging. Holidays. A century ago, as an average Briton, all my possible summer holiday destinations would have been firmly grounded on this cold, damp, grey little island. Today, means permitting, I have the glorious option of catching a flight to somewhere where summer might actually entail some sunshine. Made all the more appealing by the advent of social media, allowing me not only to enjoy myself, but make everyone else feel jealous about it. For many people across the developed world, the arrival of international tourism has been the most visible benefit of our great technological leap. Today, however, I'm here to tell you how and why the sentiment is far from universal. For beneath this Photoshop-enhanced veneer of human accomplishment, complete with its Instagrammable beaches and luxurious resorts, lies a darker reality, that our technological achievements have opened the floodgates to exploitation. Some amongst you may find this description of tourism as exploitative confusing. In theory, tourism should benefit all parties involved, with wealthier arrivals spending money in a country, thus by definition growing the economy. But unfortunately, as it turns out, this neat bit of economics is not actually, in fact, quite so neat. Much of the revenue, in fact, goes to multinational travel companies, hotel chains, or airlines, not the people of the country. These companies rarely have anything to do with the nation in question and are in fact often based in the same high-income countries that the tourists themselves are from. Meanwhile, the government on the receiving end of the tourists still has to pay for the infrastructure and services expected by the companies and tourists, creating a situation where a poorer nation carries the greater cost for a much smaller reward. It gets worse. Local businesses are forced to move, local housing is cleared for gated hotels, and local culture is sidelined to create a less alien atmosphere for the usually not very inquisitive tourists, whose analysis of the nation they're in normally ends at the weather, assuming they know which nation they're in the first place, which isn't a given. For those locals that remain, however, they are unable to access the new luxury tourist facilities due to their economic disparity with the new arrivals, massively increasing their own cost of living. The atmosphere of these places also changes for the worse. The scale of tourist numbers means that locals are actually strangers in their own neighbourhoods for half the year. And then, when the season ends, eerie silence descends on these half-empty ghost towns. The glittering hotels and bars go dark, leaving enormous concrete structures discarded unceremoniously across the landscape. A constant reminder to the locals that this seasonal reclamation of their territory is only temporary. This is tourism today, a situation where pure monetary greed is able to destroy the entire culture and way of life of a country, without those affected receiving any economic benefits whatsoever. The inhabitants of these nations see their cost of living skyrocket, their hometowns made unrecognisable, and their culture buried between layers of tarmac and swimming pool tiles, all in the name of profit from multinational hotel and travel companies that take the greatest cut of tourist spending. So in conclusion, far from a glittering, mutually beneficial accomplishment, modern tourism is both economically exploitative and culturally destructive. This said, this is no attempt to end our chances of occasionally getting some sunshine. All that is required is a transfer of economic control from the currently dominant multinationals to the people of the nations themselves, which could easily be achieved through public pressure in countries like Britain. If we can bring about such a change, this would solve the terrible situation, and we can all go back to mindlessly sipping pina coladas on a tropical beach far away, this time without the moral baggage. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Miles, so much for such an intriguing point of view. I'll now take a break and put my feet up like I'm sipping a pina colada and let Rosie do the job of questioner.
Yeah, thank you again, Miles, for a really well-researched and powerful speech. I know I'm certainly beginning to question my hotel staying here in Cambridge, but I'll begin. So, you mentioned travel companies and how they end up taking most of the profit from tourists. Do you think there'll ever be a time when we can remove this middleman and help poorer countries gain this revenue?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a very kind of like perceivably, at least theoretically, easy way of solving this problem economically. And I'm not sure it would necessarily involve removing the middleman, but maybe taxing them. So for example, if you've got a travel company that is taxed and that income is therefore then given to the countries which otherwise would just be exploited, then what you're doing is you're actually helping to increase that country's standard of living, revenue and GDP, and thus by definition decreasing the inequality between those two parties.
And how do you suggest this could be done? Through maybe legislation?
Yeah, I think legislation's a big part of it, and as I said, I think a tax would be a very good example. I think that perhaps another way that this could be done is through the education of large numbers of tourists, because I think, as I mentioned, cultural destruction is largely accidental, it's not malicious, and there's no reason to blame the tourists themselves directly. They're kind of pawns in a larger chess game. The problem is really that they're not being educated on different cultures or different ways of life in different countries. And I think if therefore we educate those people on how it is appropriate to behave in different countries and maybe educate them on different countries' cultures or kind of like what part of a country's religion, primary religion or culture is kind of like very sacrosanct to that country, then we'd receive a much greater kind of, there'd be a greater level of respect for the countries in question.
Of course. And do you think tourism could ever be or should ever be abolished?
No, I don't think this is a call to action to abolish tourism. However, I think that the face which tourism needs to take must change, and I think that that is incredibly important. I don't think that abolishing tourism would actually solve the problem, and in a way it would create a new problem in that because there isn't this not the increase in GDP in the countries themselves, then there is, again, a major device for decreasing inequality between different countries is taken out of the equation. So I think it's essential that we have it in there, we just need to make sure it's on the right side.
Of course, yeah. And places like the Isle of Man, where they used to have half of their revenue come from travel and tourism, especially for any motorheads in here, the TT races. Do you think that then tourism should be a good thing and encouraged, but locally or also nationally to obviously increase the cultural knowledge?
Yeah, I think that both are essentially, fundamentally good things, especially if taken through the lens of an educational experience or one in which you can expand your own understanding of the world. And I think that absolutely local tourism sure is a very, very good way of kind of like enjoying a relaxing holiday, but you can also learn a lot more through travel across the world and into completely different parts of the continents, different parts of the world. However, there is a cost to that, namely environmental, which would perhaps consider us to maybe reconsider flying so much, considering its large impact on CO2 emissions, etc. So I think that there are other costs which we need to kind of keep in our heads, but I don't think it should be a reason to avoid travel across the world as an entire concept.
Of course.
In the interest of time, please, can you make this your last question?
Of course. Now, how do you think that poorer countries could replace such revenues that they get from maybe travel and tourism and people coming into the country without having the, obviously, as you said, the negative environmental impacts?
As in, may I just clarify, as in if that part of like that sector was taken out, or as if?
Yeah, if it was taken out or reduced.
It would be incredibly difficult. And I think that this is an important thing to realise, is that tourism, as you correctly mentioned, is a huge part of the economies for multiple countries across the world, especially developing countries in kind of tropical locations where we just kind of like to go and lie on a beach. And I think that it's important that we understand that because this tourism is an important part of their economies, we can't just kind of like pull ourselves out and therefore expect no collateral. And therefore I think it's an important part of understanding our impact on the world to make sure that our tourism is sustainable and to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on those countries.
Regrettably, I'll have to draw this to a close. I'd now like to invite questions from the audience. The floor is yours. Yes, in the front row.
If you're saying that travelling with large companies and going to like resorts and things is going to be problematic, can you suggest a way that the average person might be able to travel to different countries sustainably?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. And I think that it's important to note that the reason it's problematic is because of the current framework. So I think that if you introduce legislation or a tax on these multinational corporations, there wouldn't be a problem with travelling with them. So I mean, that's kind of like half an answer to your question. Currently, if there was no change to the framework, I think it's often difficult. I think that independent travel, so travel without kind of like the use of EasyJet or another kind of like large flying brand, may be more required as such. But that would also limit your kind of range. You would only be able to go to countries within certain kind of like physical, geographical locations. So I think it's a difficult question to which there isn't really an easy answer, aside from changing the framework in which we have tourism and therefore making the use of multinational corporations not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes, in the back.
I was just wondering, you said that one way that we could help to make people change their ways by educating them on the effects that their tourism is having and how they can do it in a better way. How would we go about educating them in a way that would actually make them realise what they're doing and have to change their ways?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think that the best way that we could educate people is by making some kind of mandatory, and this kind of sounds almost ridiculous, but making some kind of mandatory kind of cultural education as part of school or as part of university or as part of college, as part of learning about the world, mandatory like PSHE. Because frankly, I think it is as important that we learn about the world and about our impact on the world in the same way. If you're looking at specific countries and how about specific tourists might look to educate themselves on specific countries, I think that if you like go to a quick Google search, like honestly, I think that that could give you a lot of information about countries and their culture. If you're looking at that kind of like being passively received, then perhaps there could be, as part of the tourist company, an education provision.
Regrettably, I'll have to draw that to a close. I'll just have the closing statements now. Well, thank you both for such an insurmountably impressive dismantlement of one of the UK's main economic sectors.
Holistically, it seems to me that the crux of this argument lies in the distinction between the gratification of carefree vacations, though they're only 6 weeks long here, and the repercussions on those who are less fortunate than ourselves. Miles himself said that the arrival of international tourism could be seen as one of the great example of modern life. Now, and then Rosie followed this up with the idea that we could remove a middleman and get the revenue to go directly to the countries. One key concept that I'll take away from this is that spending money in the lovely souvenir shops in all the countries that I visit doesn't necessarily benefit the people around there. Thank you all, to the ESU judges, to the timekeeper, to the parents and everyone who made this possible to happen. And on this very sunny Cinco de Mayo, I wish you the luck of the Irish.
Wow, well, if I understood half of the words in your vocabulary, I'd be a very intelligent man indeed. I'd like to use this transition just to kind of give props to all of our competitors again, because I think it's such a remarkable achievement to not only reach this stage, but to enter this competition in the first place. It's very difficult to be different when you're at school, and I think joining the football team is normal, you know, to a lot of the class or that sort of thing. But to stand up and say, no, I want to public speak is something that's different, and I think that's something to be really proud of. I mean, I have a cousin who's still at school, and he won't mind me telling you this story because I told it last year, so apologies to those who were here last year. But he was asked to compete and rejected the proposal because I think he felt that he would be made fun of, you know, for doing something different. And I think it's a real shame because clearly everybody here has got the confidence to come on up. But I don't think you're missing anything because my cousin, when I told him about this competition, thought that it was sponsored by a talking dog who sells insurance. So not missing much. Next up, our third presentation. Let's have the speaker from Torquay Girls Grammar School with the chair and questioner from Altrincham Grammar.
me a second. Right, hello again, or for the first time. My name is Yuvan, this is Leo, our questioner, and Rose, our wonderful speaker for today. It is time for the final round. I can't quite tell whether I'm exuberantly excited or utterly terrified to welcome you all to the grand final of the ESU. In any case, I can't go on without saying that I am extremely grateful for the opportunity to have a meltdown in front of the audience. No. To express ourselves and to express what we think on the big stage, as I'm sure we all are. This discussion today will be centered around the question, were things really better in the past? Rose is a passionate feminist and deeply cares for women's rights. So this topic carries an intimately personal significance for her. She's going to approach this from a socio-economic lens and of social justice, or perhaps injustice. In an age of social media and widening political divide among the public, are we prepared to progress, or are we going to regress? Let's find out.
My great-grandmother's parents wouldn't allow her to go to university. Then, despite having worked as a pharmacist in the Second World War, her husband wouldn't let her keep working once she'd had her children, because it would have looked as if he couldn't provide for his family as the head of the household. My grandmother had to resign from her job as a nurse every time she became pregnant, and then reapply for a new one when she was ready to return to work. My mother was born after the Sex Discrimination Act of 1973, but even she couldn't have a Barbie with a real job. Her only options were a ballerina, a babysitter, or an aerobics instructor. Whatever you might think about problems in the world right now, it definitely wasn't better for women in your day. Let's look at one particular aspect of life that was difficult and unfair for my grandmother and great-grandmother: employment. There will be some facts and statistics, it's inevitable, I'm afraid, but they will help me show that there has been massive progress for women in employment, but there's still a long way to go. Of course, women have always worked, but until the Second World War, this was either unpaid work in their homes, cooking, cleaning, and looking after children, the same tasks, but for wealthier families as a domestic servant, or possibly working in a factory. Professional jobs like a doctor, a lawyer, or a civil servant just weren't an option. Imagine being there in 1913, when the Court of Appeal said that women couldn't sit law exams to become solicitors because they didn't count as people under the legislation that applied. The two world wars changed things for women. With no men around, there was no choice but to let them work. But progress was slow. Up until the 1960s in England, women didn't continue working as a nurse once they were married. And it wasn't until 1961 that women teachers achieved equal pay with men. There was a rule that married women couldn't work as civil servants, and that rule wasn't lifted for women who wanted to work in the Foreign Office until 1973. Of course, even once women got jobs outside the home, they were still expected to do most of the work inside the home. My grandmother worked night shifts as a nurse and then returned home to look after her 3 children, doing all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, while my grandfather worked a 9-to-5 job. According to the British Social Attitudes Survey, in 1984, 75% of people thought that the washing and ironing should be done by the woman. The good news is that now the same percentage of people think it should be shared equally. The bad news is that over 60% of people say that the washing and ironing in their house is still mainly done by the woman. Reality has quite a bit of catching up to do with the change in our attitudes, and even our attitudes have still got a long way to go. In 1989, 42% of people agreed with the statement, "The family suffers when the woman has a full-time job." In 2022, that percentage had halved, but that's still 1 in every 5 people. It's quite an alarming thought that the people with these ideas might well be the ones interviewing me for a job or deciding whether or not I get promoted in the not-too-distant future. Things are definitely better now for women than they were for my female relatives, But we can't be complacent. Prehistoric attitudes that still persist aren't the only problem. Some things are actually going backwards for women. For example, the removal of the right to an abortion in the US. There are signs of a backlash against women working. For example, the terrifying recent trend of trad wives. Traditional wives have reverted back to the 1950s. They're all about how great it is to stay at home, cooking, cleaning, doing everything for their husband, and certainly not about having jobs outside the home. Of course, women shouldn't be forced to work, but glamorizing being a housewife doesn't do us any favors. Going on about how great it is to be subservient to your partner doesn't just generate unrealistic expectations. It also gives ammunition to men who argue that women don't really want equality or full-time jobs. And being financially dependent on your partner is a bad idea. Progress is slow with closing the gender pay gap and having equal numbers of women in important jobs and positions. One of my favorite bits of the Barbie movie was when Barbie sees a Miss Universe poster and goes, "Oh look, the Supreme Court." I look forward to the day when it won't be a hilarious joke to imagine that our Supreme Court is made up entirely of gorgeous women, or even just has the same number of women as men. Huh. It wasn't better in your day, not at least as far as opportunities and employment rights for women are concerned. I'm glad I was born in this millennium. But there's a lot still to do to make sure that if my daughter is giving a talk here in 30 years' time, her grandmothers will give the same answer as mine did when I asked them whether it was better in their day. They both said no. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for that brilliant speech, revealing the injustices once again, which have been embedded in Western society for centuries, inflicted against women. I'd now like to hand over to Leo, our questioner, who will probe further and hopefully expand the domain of our discussion today. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you again, Rose, for helping us to build a better communication between generations and for preparing us for awkward dinner table discourse with slightly stubborn relatives. So, to start us off, for the benefit of building a complete picture, why do you think back in these times, do you think men were pushing these kinds of ideals on women to begin with?
I think that it has pretty much always been the case, apart from some specific examples, that men have considered themselves better than women and have tried to make sure that that stays that way. I don't know why it began, possibly because men are just, well, on average, but also biologically stronger than women, or perhaps they're taller and they like being in charge. I don't know. But I don't think there's any way we can say why this happened, but we need to know that it has and that it's still going on.
Mm-hmm. Since it is still going on and people do still spread the sentiment that it was better in my day, who exactly do you think is spreading that sentiment? Who specifically?
I don't really know, but I would imagine it's the older generation whose memories have sort of faded. Mainly, well, I don't want to make any like judgments, but I would say it's probably mainly the male half who weren't actually discriminated against and didn't ever encounter that, because it was often discrimination isn't like widely visible. So quite a lot of the population probably didn't know that such a thing was going on.
One more question, if that's all right.
What do you think can be done about the spreading of such an old adage? I mean, re-education, legislation, what do you think?
I think the world is doing quite a good job of trying to make it better for women, but as I said, we can't be complacent because things could easily just slip backwards. Quite a lot of people, well, I don't know if it's quite a lot, but some people I've spoken to don't think that the gender pay gap is a real thing. It is. And just because things aren't quite as unfair for women doesn't mean they're perfectly equal. We should really try hard to make sure everyone knows that inequality hasn't been solved.
Yep, thank you very much. I'd now like to open up this discussion to the floor if anybody has any pressing questions for Rose. Yep.
Thank you. My question is actually about social media, because I'm sure figures who use social media have promoted misogynistic views and affected a lot of particularly young men, particularly our generation,
I'd blame the people who are putting misogynistic views on social media. But obviously, social media does help that spread. It does worsen the effects of anyone. So, for example, if there was just someone who was thinking to themselves, oh, I think men are better than women, that's not going to influence anyone else. But if they go on Twitter, X, and say, oh, I think men are better than women, then thousands of people are going to see that. And I think social media does play quite a big part in widening misogynistic views.
Fortunately, we do not have time for any more audience questions. So thank you, Rose, again, for that wonderful speech, and Leo for probing further into this pertinent matter of historically derived gender discriminations and gender disparities that have sort of prevailed throughout society in lots of different aspects, and even in the home. I'd like to give a few closing comments. Henry VIII would say, in relation to his many wives, I won't keep you for very much longer. So, I mean, what I was particularly alarmed by was the statistic that 79% of people have thought that women should do the washing up. I mean, to me, washing up doesn't seem something that should be gendered at all. It's a very peculiar thing indeed. And then she also brought attention to this idea that in our current society, there are some signs indeed of regression and backlash and this sort of recession back into those unfair times. Trad wives, she mentioned on social media, a throwback to a time where women were seen as inherently obsequious and inferior creatures. What can be done about this? Well, Leo and Rose have mutually agreed that we should transform people's attitudes, and that inequality is still present, people should know, in today's society, and that we should think about this matter very deeply, and we should not ignore it in any way. Sadly, our time is nearly over, so a big thanks to Winston Churchill, the Churchill College, the judges, questioner and speaker, and all the rest of the schools who have come here. I hope this has been a very enlightening discussion and that you've learned a thing or two today. I'm Yuvan, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you will all agree it is wonderful to hear people talking about something that they are so passionate about. I was fortunate enough to hear that speech in the semi-final. I was flitting between the two rooms. One of the semi-finals was held here in Wolfson Hall, and they were doing some wonderful public speaking. But the second semi-final was held in the 60s room. And when I head over there, they weren't public speaking, actually. They were winning the World Cup and landing on the moon. Tough crowd. We are halfway through. Let's move on to our fourth presentation. We have the speaker from Altrincham Grammar with the chair and questioner from Ibstock Place.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all to the national final of the ESU here at Churchill College, Cambridge for 2024. And I'm thrilled to see such a large audience here today. In just a moment, Tosin from AGSB will be speaking about the artificial intelligence revolution and how it is a win for us all. Tosin was inspired to write about this topic as it is a prevalent subject of today's society. Furthermore, he has a passion for social development and was interested in studying the AI's effect on society. Also joining me on the panel today is Lorenza Rees from Ibstock Place School, who will offer her viewpoint on Tosin's speech later on. Lorenza is the perfect questioner for this topic, as she has found ChatGPT extremely useful for revision. But don't worry, teachers, she doesn't use it for homework. And finally, my name is Sebastian Bandeira. I'm from Ibstock Place School and will be your chairperson for this presentation. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Tosin to take the stage.
It selects your next Netflix obsession, suggests your latest Facebook friend, and can even edit your pictures for the perfect social media post. Artificial intelligence is revolutionizing our world.
At the mention of AI, popular example ChatGPT comes to mind, obviously most useful for students doing their homework at midnight. However, you will be surprised to know that the use of AI is even more far-reaching, defined by pioneering leader Marvin Minsky as the science of making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by people. We all want to be richer, healthier, more educated, more equal. But for centuries, these desires have been persistent issues plaguing the human experience. So today, by discussing AI's role in work, education, healthcare, and global development, I aim to prove that through AI, we can wage war on these enemies of prosperity, and we just might be able to win. To begin, the humble 9 to 5 may seem like the same mundane adult ritual that's compulsory for every over 21. However, within these 8 hours are tasks and projects requiring management, efficiency, and technology, and this is where AI comes in. We've all seen it in customer service, maybe in the content that you've read on websites, but it's being used more interestingly by 51% of businesses in cybersecurity too. AI can be a crucial asset in addressing security challenges, whether through protecting accounts from fraud or shielding our data from social media sharks. It uses insights technology to analyze data patterns and provide recommendations on how best to respond to a potential breach, thus improving online incident responsiveness. Great, so it's good for businesses. But this is not the only place that AI is assisting us. It might have already found its way into your classroom. Maybe through that AI-written essay in your teacher's desk. I know what you've done. Large class sizes, underfunding, low pay for teaching staff, the burden of teaching and learning that can be alleviated through AI. Surely personalised lesson and intervention plans, along with much needed support with assessment, reporting and feedback, would help. With average class sizes in state education of about 26 pupils, I think that's a resounding yes. A yes to better learning for me, for you, and for every learner in the classroom. Beyond the world of work, AI is also becoming increasingly symbiotic with traditional medical practices. Its disease detection capabilities have detected cancers more easily and in their preliminary stages, translating mammograms for breast cancer, for instance, 30 times faster and 49% more effectively than traditional diagnostic processes. In other advancements, Google's DeepMind is combining the best in neuroscience and machine learning to aid decision-making that mimics the human brain. California's Biomedical Research Association is streamlining drug testing, turning a 12-year, $359 million process into a shorter, cheaper, more life-saving one. The list continues. With its capabilities to aid the treatment for the most ill, vulnerable, and poor, especially in developing nations, AI has to be a win for us all. It's saving lives. What could be better? This idea of development brings me to my final point. Pardon the pun, but artificial intelligence puts the AI in aid, with a decisive role to play in solving the world's most pressing issues, such as climate change, disease prevention, and drought. Its pandemic modelling and surveillance systems employed during COVID-19 were only used in the pilot stages of AI in the field. Imagine the lives we could save if it was used further. So, to conclude, the artificial intelligence revolution is positively transforming work, education, health, and development to help the big bosses, the common worker, the lazy students, and the least fortunate alike. Yes, we need to be responsible, Yes, this new age requires legislation to ensure responsibility. But this revolution is exciting. It includes us all, and it might just change our lives, even if it is one Netflix suggestion at a time. Thank you.
Thank you for that in-depth speech. Now I'd like to invite Lorenza to explore this topic further.
Thank you for that very thought-provoking speech, but I'm sure the question on everyone's mind is, how are we going to deal with AI unavoidably taking our jobs?
I think the greatest threat to employment posed by AI is many jobs that have sort of clerical and more administrative roles, as well as majorly data analysis, according to research done by Forbes. However, it's all about how we view AI. If we use it as a tool, it can enrich and aid our work and employment. However, if we're not responsible with it, this is when it poses the threat to employment. So really, this question isn't about AI, it's about us. How responsible are we with the tools that we've been given?
You mentioned just then the jobs that AI will sort of be taking over. However, since these are more like lower skill, lower income jobs, isn't it quite unfair that these are the people who are going to be robbed from a career?
I think definitely there's an element of the fact that it isn't fair. But again, I return to the idea of responsibility. Legislation is going to be our best friend when it comes to dealing with AI. And if we've got legislation that allows it to become an assistive tool rather than something that takes over employment, then I guess lower skilled jobs might not be as sort of in danger as perhaps thought by most people.
And I hope that does take place, that
Yes,
legislation.
definitely.
But to widen the topic from the workplace and look at this in the wider world,
Yes.
and just to play devil's advocate here. So you argue how AI is going to help developing countries. However, surely that's reliant on the benevolence of developed countries giving technological aid to others. However, isn't this quite unlikely, seeing as you've seen how reluctant they've been to help with like medical stuff in the past?
I definitely agree with that point, and absolutely, there's a responsibility on major corporations to really bring AI to the places it matters most. I'll cite an example of image recognition and satellite imagery being able to help farmers to maximize crop yields and suggest optimal farming times. However, in the very capitalist domineering world that we live in today, it's so easy for people to get lost in profit and how AI can be another profit-making tool rather than something that might help. So yes, there's definitely something in there to suggest that we need to be putting more of an onus on big multinational corporations to really help where it matters most. And I think they will.
Yes.
Because this is different to any of the other advancements that we've seen before. This is entering a new stage in human technological capabilities. And in doing so, it affects all of us. So all of us have to be there for each other to ensure that it's used safely.
And just to follow up on the idea of helping us all and like helping the planet, surely you could argue that the environmental damage that AI will cause due to the energy that it's going to require, that could also hinder the planet.
I think definitely, but I'm not really sure where sort of the environmental dangers might necessarily come from using AI models, especially. In fact, it could help to solve some of the climate problems that we're facing in our world today, being able to generate solutions to some of the most pressing issues within the climate crisis. So it might pose that issue, but I think it can also be used to the opposite effect as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one more question for you. So you mentioned how it's great for data protection. However, do you think there's also a bit of uncertainty around, certainly at the moment, like Alexa listening to what we're saying? How can we stop this uncertainty and keep people at bay that AI is safe?
I think the main thing that convinces people that AI is safe is because of the different aspects in which it can be increasingly incorporated into our lives to help us. The aim of this speech today wasn't for me to try and sell AI. I don't work for Microsoft. But it was mainly to reassure you that this is a tool that is here to stay. It's here to help. And we're all going to need it, and it's going to become increasingly integrated into our lives. Yes, this brings ethical concerns of privacy, GDPR. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to use this responsibly and really try and be in the places where policy and legislation is happening and taking place. That's why this kind of stage is so useful for young people, because we are going to be the ones in the future who are managing this perhaps threat, but definitely technological advancement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those thought-provoking questions, Lorenza. Now I'd like to open up to questions from the audience.
Hello, my question actually is around dangers of AI, which I think is something that you mentioned briefly at the end there. Stephen Hawking and many other great thinkers of the past 100 years or so have openly said that AI is a very dangerous tool, and you've talked about how we can responsibly manage it, but in a case where AI is almost thinking for itself outside of our own control, how would you suggest we control the use of AI?
I think it's a very interesting point you raised, and it's quite serendipitous actually. Exactly a month today, there's going to be a governance conference held by the EU in Brussels on AI law. And the EU AI Act, passed in 2023, was the world's first comprehensive law regarding AI. And within that, it identifies different levels of risk. And part of the unacceptable level of risk written in that legislation is the generative AI that can sort of think for itself in a way that you've already referenced. And its guidance for dealing with that is to take extreme caution, and steps that are outlined in the legislation help people, especially like businesses, as well as consumers, to be able to do that effectively.
Thank you very much. Now, before I give my concluding speech, I would like to give some thanks to a few people. Firstly, and most importantly, Churchill College for hosting us today and providing those wonderful vegetable crisps as well as that fruit salad, really providing that 5 a day for us all. Secondly, the ESU for organising today's competition and all the behind-the-scenes work they've done to ensure it's smooth running. And the judges, of course, for their valuable time, and today's speaker, Tosin, as well as Lorenza for inquisitive questions. And finally, you guys, the audience, who I know will take away the key points from Tosin's speech. But what exactly were they? Well, Tosin reassured us that we were in control of AI and convinced us to embrace it rather than reject it. He sufficiently proved that it would improve all areas of our life. But personally, my favourite part of his speech was when he acknowledged the negatives and disproved them one by one. I think we all know he deserves one final round of applause.
Don't forget about those microphones. So I'd like to use my next few minutes to tell you a little bit about one of my experiences in the summer with the ESU's Debate Academy. Now, I'm not a paid employee of the English Speaking Union. I am a volunteer, and they haven't told me to speak about this, but I think watching you, all of you up on stage now, it really does kind of, it falls to me to encourage a lot of you to look into the ESU's Debate Academy, which is a program that's run for a week in August, where you're residential, you're on site at a lovely school not too far from here in Stamford, where you spend a week learning how to debate, learning public speaking, connecting with people who are very much like yourselves, living with them for a week, and there's all sorts of different levels that you can join in at. There's kind of classes based on your current ability. For everybody here right now, I'm sure you're going to be right up there in terms of your ability, but I think it's definitely something to consider for those of you who haven't heard of it before. Perhaps I know there are a few of you in the audience today who are alumni of the Debate Academy program, but definitely something to explore. And going back to one of the first presentations where they said that public speaking is the #1 fear in the world, it's quite remarkable that anybody can come up here and speak like this. But those people who were voting on the #1 fear in the world being public speaking clearly didn't see the size of the spider in my hotel room this morning. Let's move on to the penultimate presentation of the evening. We are rattling through these, and I'm quite sad actually that we're getting to the end, because we've experienced a remarkable standard of speaking, and judges, good luck is all I have to say if the first four are anything to go by. Let's have the speaker from Ibstock Place School with the chair and questioner from Stamford School, which I've just mentioned actually, so come up on stage.
And welcome to the grand final of the ESU Public Speaking Competition. Though I think you may have already heard this a couple of times today. I'm Sanvi, and I'll be your chair for today, taking care of proceedings. Why is courage the most important virtue? That's what Tallulah from Ibstock Place will be talking to us about today. This question actually stems from a quote by Winston Churchill, the man in all his glory behind me. Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because, as has been said, it is the quality which guarantees all others. As John F. Kennedy once said, too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. Well, I can assure you this won't be happening today, as I know our questioner Rory, and he'll be helping us to delve deeper into this topic. Rory and I are both here from Stamford School. I'm looking forward for us to learn more about if courage is really the most important virtue. To help with timings, I will knock on the table 30 seconds from the end of your speech. Take it away, Tallulah.
It's the 27th of October, 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On the radar of your submarine, deep behind enemy lines, suddenly appears 3 blinking dots. Your captains want to retaliate, though they are uncertain what it is coming towards you. You have seconds to make the choice. Defend yourself, launch the warheads that could start a nuclear war, or defy your colleagues, potentially leaving your ship and your country defenseless. This is the choice that faced Naval Officer Vasily Arkhipov, but he chose not to launch the torpedoes, quite literally saving the world. This is Churchill courage, what he calls the first of human qualities. The sense of masculine courage was something that he would have valued in the times of turmoil that he lived and led through. But there are more types of courage than gilded soldiers storming into battle. It ranges from political activists seeking justice against oppression, to children standing up to a playground bully. Or perhaps it is spending your whole Sunday at a public speaking competition 3 days before your first GCSE. Okay, maybe the last one was a bit facetious. But what then is courage? I looked it up in a dictionary, an Oxford one, sorry. The definition is the ability to do something that frightens oneself. So with this in mind, in this speech, I'll be explaining why courage is so important, how it underpins crucial human qualities, and finally, how we all can be more courageous in our everyday lives. Firstly, why is courage so important? A sense of courage allows us to take the risks that enable human progress. After all, no progress was ever made by simply staying wrapped up in a duvet with a bag of mini eggs, watching Gilmore Girls for the 8th time. In 1903, when the Wright brothers stood on the edge of a cliff with their prototype plane, not knowing whether they would fly or literally crash and burn, they took an enormous risk. But they had the courage to test their groundbreaking hypothesis. And here we are, 120 years later, where almost everyone in this room has likely been on a plane, and humanity now looks beyond the skies and to the stars for their next adventure. But it doesn't always go to plan. Sometimes the risks we take end up backfiring. And when that happens, it takes courage to bounce back from failure. Take Churchill himself, who faced a humiliating defeat at Gallipoli, his lack of planning meaning that Britain underestimated the Turkish forces, used out-of-date maps, and were not prepared for the blistering heat that caused much of their rations to expire. But instead of fading into the background of UK politics after his subsequent demotion and resignation, Churchill tenaciously made it as Prime Minister, and his experience of failure in a crisis certainly aided in his leadership during World War II. We can all agree then that courage is indeed a critical human quality. But Churchill didn't just say it was important, he said it was the most important. So let's compare it to the other qualities that society values. Some people would say that honesty is the most important virtue. It's vital to maintaining healthy human relationships. But real honesty comes from courage. The reason people lie is because they're scared of others' reactions to the truth. True candor comes from a disregard for this fear, from courage. Others might venerate empathy, the skill of understanding those around you, but it can be scary to open up and feel deeply for others. True empathy requires you to go out of your comfort zone and step into others' shoes. Courage. Empathy, honesty, the more virtues I examined, the more this pattern emerged. Kindness requires courage, temperance requires courage, creativity requires courage. Whatever virtue is most important to you, courage underpins it. Finally then, how can we all be more courageous? This This is the part of my speech where I should tell the inspiring tale how I overcame my own fear of public speaking, the dismal failure of my first ever debating competition, and the courage it took to bounce back and make it all the way here to Cambridge. But writing that speech for an ESU competition, preaching to this choir, wouldn't be very courageous. So, to take a risk, I want to instead extol the virtues of cowardice. The reality is that we're not brave all the time, and that is okay. Sometimes it is all right to stay wrapped up in your duvet watching Rory drop out of Yale for the 16th time because you need to prioritise your mental health. And sometimes it takes courage to be a coward. Muhammad Ali was condemned as a traitor for refusing to fight in Vietnam, but in doing so, he risked his whole career and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. That was courage, and his sacrifice resulted in more freedoms surrounding conscription for the men of his country. In conclusion, I agree with Churchill. Courage is first among human qualities. Where we can be courageous, we should. But if you're not able to be courageous all the time, then that's fine too. Your time will come. Eat those mini eggs, but when the occasion presents itself, rise to it. After all, Vasily Arkhipov might not have been courageous every day of his life, but he was when it mattered most.
Thank you, Tallulah. I think we all enjoyed that. I'd now like to invite Rory to help us further explore this topic.
Thank you, Sammy. And thank you, Tallulah, for your inspiring speech. I wish I had any bit of the courage you displayed just then. So, you mentioned how courage underpins most values we currently have and the virtues we display. Do you think that those virtues must often work with courage, like how Churchill, you mentioned, persevered? Do you think he could have done that with courage alone?
I think that courage is the thing that underpins these qualities, as I say. And I think that you can have these qualities as much as you like, but the real way that you can make change is if it is based in courage. And I think that Churchill showed resilience, he showed determination, but it took him courage to continue his career, to not just kind of go and quit politics because of the failure that he faced. And so, yeah, I think that his qualities worked in harmony with courage to get him to success.
Very inspiring. Do you think it's ever possible to have just a bit too much courage?
Well, I think that courage is more of a feeling than a mindset. I think that you will come across very brave people in your life, but I think that the people that are the most successful in being brave, the people that are the most successful in being brave have this feeling that they can harness at the times when they need it most. And so I don't think that you can have too much of that.
You mentioned how cowardice is sometimes the correct choice. Do you feel there are any specific situations in which cowardice requires a lot of courage?
I think, for one, something that all of us teenagers have probably faced is peer pressure. And I think that if you are being told to do something, or you're kind of being egged on in the playground, or whatever it is, I think that instead of doing the courageous thing, which is like going and doing this dare or whatever, I think that you might appear to be cowardly by not doing it, but you're actually showing huge amounts of courage by going against your friends and potentially risking being teased for a very long time.
Do you think that, pardon me for repeating myself, but do you think that too much courage can sometimes result in overextending yourself and accidentally hurting people around you?
I think that actually it requires courage to know when to stop. And so I think that when you have large amounts of courage, that is probably not something that you would do. I think that having courage is very much rooted in being in touch with your moral compass, and so I don't think that kind of hurting people is necessarily a result of having courage.
Thank you. Do you feel that sometimes courage might mislead people in their actions, and that when they have too much courage, they will accidentally do something they shouldn't?
I think this kind of highlights the fine line between foolishness and courage. I think that courage comes from a kind of a respect for the fear that you feel and a disregard for that because you appreciate that the risk that you're taking could result in a greater reward. But I think that when you do something that could hurt yourself or others, that kind of comes from a place where you haven't taken that calculated risk, you haven't thought about what you're doing, and you haven't weighed up the pros and cons of what you're doing.
I think and I hope some other people out there would like to hear some suggestions of how you can be a bit more courageous.
Well, as I said, I think it's just to do with staying in touch with your morality and standing up for what is right when you have that chance. And I think that, of course, as I said in my speech, not everyone is going to have that strength every single day, but I think when you're really seeing something in society, like from as small as in your house to in society as a whole, like going to protest, I think that everyone can try and make that change and be courageous by staying in touch with their morality.
Thank you, but that's all we have time for today. Now, if anyone has any pressing questions, well, I can see a few of you do. Now's your time to ask as I welcome questions from the floor. Yes. Lady at the front.
Do you think that prioritising one quality like courage would diminish other more arguably more important qualities such as sympathy?
I think that in my speech I've explored how I find courage to be the most important, and that doesn't really diminish the other qualities. I find that courage is the most important not because of the strength of that virtue, but more because of the way that it props up the other virtues that are in a way just as important. But I think that courage has that edge because it really kind of emphasises those other qualities that you can have, like sympathy, for example.
Yes.
Do you think it requires self-love and a high sense of self-worth to recognise in oneself the ability to change the world so that you can more easily come across courage in yourself?
I think that there are lots of people who don't necessarily have the privilege of being supported of loving themselves that have shown great courage. But I think that an act of courage doesn't have to be a massive, brash display of bravery. I think that even thinking courageous thoughts against an oppressive regime, or just making small actions that can change, I think is going to build up into bigger acts of courage that can make positive change, and with that comes a sense of self-love as well.
Thank you so much for all those interesting questions. I'm sorry, that's all we have time for today. I particularly enjoyed the idea that the question where courage could diminish other qualities, but Talila said that it doesn't, whereas it props up other qualities that people have. So, what did we learn today? Talila addressed the question, why is courage the most important virtue? And I was excited to learn that Churchill, when he originally said his quote, had a sense of masculine courage, but there are other different types of courage through political activities or simply standing up against bullies in the playground. We also found out about the other virtues, like honesty, where Talila believes that real honesty comes from courage, and empathy, where stepping out and thinking in other people's shoes requires a great deal of courage. Rory raised the interesting issue of how courage works with the other virtues, and Talila pointed out that Churchill's qualities worked well with his courage. Finally, thank you to our speaker, questioner, and of course to our audience. But most of all, I'd like to thank Churchill College and the ESU for this wonderful opportunity, and of course to the judges for so generously giving their time today. Thank you.
So Talila's speech was another that I caught in the semi-finals, and she said something really interesting in the semi-finals. She said, it takes great, tremendous courage to stand up in front of people and make bad jokes. You'd all do well to remember that when you're not laughing at mine. Let's move on to the final presentation of the day. It's been a wonderful afternoon of public speaking, and sad to be on to the final one, but a very high standard, as we've said, and all of you should be very proud of yourself for getting up on this stage today and making it to this final. So without further ado, let's have the speaker from Stanford School alongside the chair and questioner from Churchill College, please.
Здравейте, аз се казвам Жара и днес искам да ви приветствам. No, hang on, sorry, just give me a minute. Yeah, this does seem to be the English-speaking union, not the Bulgarian family dinner. My apologies. You see, I get confused sometimes, what with dual nationality and 2 GCSE language speaking exams just in the past week. So I often don't form cohesive sentences. Regardless, I will try my best. So with that, take 2. Hello and welcome to the English-Speaking Union Public Speaking Competition. We are now in the final presentation of the grand final and I cannot believe I'm here. My name is Jara Island and I will be your host for the next 15 minutes. I would love to introduce our speaker Tess, who will be speaking on the topic of whether or not film has lost its originality. On my left is Thomas, our questioner, who will help to further explore Tess's topic with his insightful questions in just a few minutes. But for now, Tess, you have 5 minutes. Good luck.
Thank you, Jara. Turn on almost any rom-com, and 18 minutes in, chances are your protagonist will be having an almost kiss. At least, that's according to Marina Hyde, journalist and media aficionado. And I don't know about you, but the last few action films I've watched seem to have the same classic Hollywood grime and, of course, the obligatory power running out of an explosion. Now, from this, you might conclude that film is simply a reiteration of the same tropes, same storylines, and same endings. You might even say that film has lost originality. Well, I believe we can't write film off that easily. Today, I'll be showing you why there's hope for film yet. To do that, I'll be focusing on 3 key areas. Was film original at the start, the tyranny of the mass market, and the promise technology brings? Right, claiming we've lost originality implies film had originality in the past. And if you ask me, that's a hard argument to uphold. Many films we think of as quintessentially old Hollywood, like Gone with the Wind, weren't in fact original creations, but instead adaptations of already existing material. Much-loved Hollywood action films, from Zorro to Robin Hood, were all in fact taken from popular books and plays. So too for screwball comedies. Nonetheless, early film wasn't entirely unoriginal either. During the golden age of cinema, the emergence of Charlie Chaplin's physical comedy and westerns with their huge landscapes were indeed unique to the big screen. So presenting early cinema as a heyday of originality is maybe a false premise. It was more of a hybrid. But surely as cinema gained its confidence, things would improve, right? Wrong. As cinema developed, it actually became increasingly ruled by the mass market. During the golden age, studios had been able to sell their flops to cinemas by bundling them in with one quality hit. All that ended with the introduction of the Paramount Accords, which broke up the monopoly the big 5 Hollywood studios had. Suddenly, every film needed to be a surefire hit, catering to the widest demographic possible, middle America. For me, the nail in this metaphorical coffin was the growth of shareholders. Now, studios also had to appease a whole host of people whose only focus was profit. And with profit as king, big Hollywood studios essentially lost the ability to take risks. Every film had to be safe, and safe has never been conducive with originality. Inevitably, this push for mass market box office winners meant that instead of strive for originality, studios simply replicated previous successes, because originality becomes synonymous with risk. So, if the late 20th century was decidedly unoriginal, have things improved at all? I would argue they have, and for one key reason: technology. For decades, cinema has been structured around the all-powerful box office. But streaming changed this. Platforms like Netflix hoovered up small creative studios and used them to produce content at a rate never seen before. Now, to say all of this new content was original would be generous, but the money and freedom Netflix threw at their creatives allowed risks to be taken as passion projects once again saw the green light. And it was the new perspectives that these offered that I believe to be fundamental to the return of originality. But let me not get carried away. because apart from else, this heyday is already proving short-lived. Now that Netflix have built their empire, they've already started to fall back on the traditional model of buying up existing content and commissioning remakes. So, where does this leave us today? I would argue this doesn't mean film originality has been lost, but it does mean it's in danger. As much as some of us love to complain about the tired cliches of film, the future of this originality also involves us, the audience. There's always been a battle between profit and originality. But as consumers, we can influence which films are successful and therefore which are made, even more so since streaming. So, if we want originality in film, the thought I wish to leave you with is this: are we willing to put our money where our mouth is? Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. That was amazing. Now, I would like to hand over to Thomas, who will have 4 minutes to investigate Tess's topic further.
Thank you for the introduction, Zara. Superhero movies. Aliens invading, big, muscly superhero comes in, saves the day. We've seen it 1,000 times before. So my question is it the films themselves that lack originality, or the themes and the storylines on which they're based?
I think that in a society where we're influenced by everything we see, it's impossible for anything to be truly original. Nothing can be truly the first of its kind, I think, because we're all influenced by something. But the ideas behind a film are undoubtedly the most important part of what makes something original. If it has a unique perspective and a unique idea and brings something new to the table, that's what original cinema is about.
Okay, original cinema. And how could advancements in technology, like virtual reality, AI-generated content, interactive storytelling, how could they affect originality in film in the future?
In my speech, I think I focused mostly on streaming when it came to technology. You're absolutely right in saying that all these advancements we're seeing in After Effects in films and CGI and virtual reality is absolutely crucial in meaning there's a future for film that is original. Because, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a virtual reality film, and I'd love to. And I think that's a fascinating new area we could totally explore within the film industry.
Okay, another thing. So I'm taking you back. In the glory days of Hollywood, there was a set of rules and guidelines to which themes should be included in movies. So now, and in the future, as societal attitudes change, are there any particular new topics or themes that you think will become more prominent, and how could that impact into originality?
Yeah, so what I think you're referencing in the early days of Hollywood is the Hays Code, which I think a lot of you'll know about, and was basically limited what could be shown in Hollywood films that was deemed traditional. It limited a lot of things, and I think in many ways hindered originality. I think in the future, this kind of regulation, especially self-imposed regulation like the Hays Code, which basically was supposed to reflect attitudes of the audience watching films, is absolutely something we can avoid by being a more open-minded audience and by looking for diversity and inclusion and interesting new perspectives in films. We can totally move forward within the film industry.
And I'm going to take you to the completely other side of the film industry. How could marketing influence perceptions of originality?
I think that film studios exist to make money, right? They can say all they want about art and cinema, but at the end of the day, they're here to make profit. And so marketing, successfully marketing, diverse and interesting films and original films is a key factor in making sure they're financially successful, which means that we'll get more original films. If the only films that succeed are like high school movies, then I think you kind of get stuck in a loop. So good marketing is absolutely key to financial success for original films.
Mm-hmm.
I think this will have to be the last question.
Okay, so ultimately, do you believe that film is truly losing originality, or is it perhaps the perception, is perhaps the perception of stagnation a result of selective attention and nostalgia?
I think that film hasn't lost originality, and I think that it can be, quite a lot of people can go quite easily, oh, when I used to watch films, they used to be so original, but these days it's just Marvel and another one of those rom-coms, you know? I think it's quite easy for us all to reminisce about the past, like other people have talked about in their speeches. And I think that we are currently in what could be, and hopefully still is, a heyday of originality within film. And I think we need to embrace that
and look towards a future where original and interesting cinema is something we're absolutely interested in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you. Now, buckle up, people. You guessed it, it's your turn. I know that your worst fears have been realised and you're horrified at the idea of asking your own question. But at risk of sounding a bit too much like your Year 12 careers advisor, I highly recommend you take up this excellent opportunity. So do we have any audience questions? Yep, over here in the front.
What role do you think audiences have to play in addressing the key problems of originality in film?
I think that because we live in a capitalist society and because studios exist to make money, the most important tool we have to use is our money, right? We've got to put our money where we want original cinema. And so we've got to support original films that come into cinemas, and we've got to make sure that they're successful, so studios make more of them. But I think there's also a big role in showing that we as an audience, as a society, are interested in different and new and strange ideas that we haven't seen in films before. So I think that's where originality is found.
Yep, any more? Yep, down here.
Do you think there's an inherent problem with unoriginality to a certain extent? Is there a problem with enjoying Marvel just because there are 30 films that are widely similar?
I think that it's important to make a distinction between original cinema and inherently good cinema. Just because something's original, it can still be absolutely awful, and no one makes anything like it again, and maybe it should never have been made. But original cinema is important because it allows us to try out new ideas. Some of those might fail, but some of those, like Marvel, might be really successful and lead to some films we really like. And I think that if we just make films that are like films that have already been made, we're never going to get any variety. And I don't know about you, but there's only so many Iron Man films I can watch.
All right, one more quick one. Yep, over there in the back corner. Guy on the right. I'm sorry.
All I was just wondering is, you said about how the Hays Code has been removed. Do you think there should still be any sort of codes that should be implemented to make sure, to give guidance on what Hollywood studios can make and what they shouldn't make?
I think that any piece of legislation which tells people what they can and can't produce in art is pretty problematic, because I think in many ways it can restrict free speech, which is really necessary to have a healthy democracy. I do think, however, that there is necessarily consequences for when people make films that have really problematic things in them. If someone makes films that are wildly offensive or that prey on minority groups or things like that, I think that just because we don't have regulation necessarily against, oh, you can't say this and you can't say that, doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences for those films.
All right, thank you. That does conclude our 2 minutes, if only you had the courage to ask your question. Today, through rom-com and action movies, we explored how whether or not film has lost its originality and whether what we deem original and old cinema is actually original, and actually the inspirations that it has taken from famous literature at the time. We then moved on to how Hollywood has now had to adapt to cater to a massive, mostly American audience, and it is ultimately focused on profit despite its many claims to the opposite. But we also explored technology's role and how streaming has provided a different alleyway into sharing cinema, and how this has increased the production of content and perhaps given original content more of an opportunity to thrive. Finally, through Tessa's questions and Thomas's further explorations, we were left with the impression that, and perhaps the plea to us as consumers, to choose where we put our money, so to speak, and to choose what we watch carefully. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you, most of all to the judges at the back who make this possible, but also to the audience, participants, our host today and our host Churchill College in Cambridge, and of course the audience. If I didn't say that already, I might have. I know that I have thoroughly enjoyed this event, and I hope that you have too, or at least you've learnt something, whether it be something about films or perhaps a word or two of Bulgarian. So as they say, doviđenje.
Wow, thank you very much, and thank you for my thank you, much appreciated. Lovely to hear such a lovely speech about film, Austin Powerful, speech. Now that all of our speeches are done, I'm going to go off around the back and have an incredible sulk. Let's hope that the relationships you've formed today are a wonderful James Bond with others. Or perhaps they'll be a bit rocky. I don't know, work with me here. We are done now. It's absolutely flown by this evening. It's been a wonderful evening. And you know, I hope that we can go back to the future to redo this at some point. I'm now going to tell you about the next steps. Our wonderful judges at the back are going to retire very briefly. Although I imagine it won't be brief because they've got a tricky decision on their hands to come up with the winning team and the individual awards. I believe the plan is that we will meet back here at around 10 to 5, although that may be 5 minutes later as we started 5 minutes later. And when you return, we will announce the winners of the 2024 English Speaking Union Churchill Public Speaking Competition, as well as the individual awards for Best Speaker, Best Questioner, and Best Chairperson. Thank you very much, and I shall see you in around half an hour. Wow, saw a few excited jumps over there and smiles, so how very exciting is this? Our judges, you will have seen, are back in the room. You can all turn and stare at them now. And they have our answers, the ones that we're all waiting for. I'd just like to say before they come up on stage, we had over 150 viewers on the live stream in total today. So not only have you all been speaking to the amount of people that are in this room, you've also been speaking to an additional 150, which I think is quite remarkable again. So let's have another round of applause for that. So I'd now like to invite onto the stage two people. Firstly, our Chair Judge Simon to deliver feedback and the results, and also our ESU Director General Charles Byrne to the stage to present our winners with their medals.
Well, the judges, it's true, we have returned from our retirement, and it was a more active retirement than I might have expected, to be honest. But what a pleasure it's been to listen to each and every speaker today. When I say speaker, I mean, of course, all the roles, not just those in the speaker role in this competition. For us as judges, of course, yes, it is a challenge, and it's maybe cliche, but it's also true. For teams to have reached this stage in the competition is the most extraordinary achievement. And I salute each and every one of you who I know will have worked so hard over an extended period of time in order to be here, not to mention who knows how many GCSEs that some of you may be juggling. The spoken word is it's a poor medium for transmitting knowledge and information, although obviously some knowledge and information is often being transferred. But because listening is hard work, and it's at the same time a fabulous medium for shifting how people think, how they feel, how they act. And I'd suggest to you that again, speakers or the people on stage today, at their most impactful, were the ones who achieved that, who influenced in how we think, how we feel, possibly in terms of how we actually act, the ones who did that the most effectively. And the format of this competition is, of course, unusual in that it's actually a team-based public speaking competition, which is rare. And I know this in my own case, having competed in this back in 1993, my school over in Worcestershire. We did not get past the second round. But also in more recent years as an adult, competing in public speaking competitions that are more solo. And what I love about the format of this competition is how interdisciplinary it is. And arguably, and by the way, I've had experience speaking in competitions that have gone all the way to world level and whatnot, but this competition combines not just the ability to impart a message and to bring that to life, but also to question, to demonstrate active listening. It brings emotion as well as rationale. It brings impromptu as well as prepared. It brings clarity of thought. There's all sorts of different skills that are required. The energy, the warmth that a chair can bring. And so briefly, I may just offer just a couple of thoughts on each of the roles. If this was an early round of the competition, it would be advice, tips that you might consider for the next round of the competition. Of course, we're in a unique situation right here where it's definitely not for that. But my hope is ideas that might be useful, relevant for each of you as speakers in your life right now and who knows beyond. I spent last week working with a number of execs on skills which absolutely run to the heart of the skills of a good questioner. To be more impactful in meetings, to conduct due diligence, to ask open questions rather than just closed questions, to really stimulate and open up the thinking rather than just to crunch the speaker that they're talking to. Active listening skills in meetings, fundamentally important skill. Endorsed, I know, by a good friend of mine who's a retired hostage negotiator from Scotland Yard. Right? So for questioners, it's such a challenging role, isn't it? Because it's so short, you have such little speaking time, and yet the best questioning, of course, took place when typically the questions were more open rather than closed. They invited a development of thinking rather than shutting down. They did not necessarily imply what the questioner thinks the answer is or should be, and may have, in some cases, challenged the speaker to consider what other viewpoints they might like to consider. So from the questioner's point of view, the clarity of those questions, the ability to follow up on something that the speaker may just have said, makes a huge difference, as opposed to running through a checklist, shopping list of pre-prepared questions that I'm going to ask whether or not you... right? So the impromptu nature of that, being agile and responsive, hugely significant. As the chair, as the opener, the energy makes such a difference, doesn't it? So important, so early on, the warmth, the energy that's brought to the room. And of course, if a speaker is locked into notes or cards, immediately that affects the energy. Being comfortable with, right up front, being able to look the audience in the eye and address them and engage them in a welcoming way makes such a difference in that precious first 10, 15 seconds of a chair's role, for example. Whilst at the same time keeping a close eye on how the timings were, keeping a grip on that, interrupting appropriately, as we saw that happen on a number of occasions, and ensuring enough time to wrap up and summarise those key themes in an appropriate way. So I commend chairs for their ability to bring that warmth and energy, and I encourage you, in situations where you're needing to hold a meeting, to hold a room, right up, if only in the first 10 seconds, ensure you're looking people in the eye and you don't go straight to the script, to the notes. No? As far as the speaker's concerned, and I realise it's a rather obvious point to consider, but the ability to impart a message that's clear, that sticks. Not easy to do. And if you only succeed in only making one thing stick as a result of what you've had to say, you've succeeded where most speakers fail. A couple of thoughts that struck me, and also this may also be in the minds of the judges, is the balance between the rational and the more emotive. The third person, the third party versus the personal. And I suspect as a listener you will have been struck by those moments when you really felt something from what the speaker was saying. Because in the end this is a live event, isn't it? It's not just about what's coming from here implanting in your head. It's as much also about what's here and connecting with an audience. Speaking is an emotional medium, I'd suggest, more so in many ways than the written word. That's perhaps my bias. So I encourage you as speakers to consider this, the power of personal experience, the power of being willing to be evocative, to take some emotional risk as a way in which to add colour to the rational thought, the analytical thinking that you bring. So there's just some thoughts based on some of the reflections for us as a judging team. There were 5 of us in the judging team, as you will be aware, and it fell to us to identify who we felt fulfilled the role of speaker, chair and questioner the best. I'll announce that in a moment. And also then, of course, the winning team. Let me just say one further thing before announcing those results, which is this, that whenever you're assessed as a speaker, again, whatever your role may be, and the same is true in the workplace too, or perhaps you're speaking at a wedding, or a friend's birthday, or a leaving drink speech, it's subjective. No matter what criteria you put in place, there is nothing mathematical or indeed truly objective about how we assess other people through the spoken word. And I know that as a recipient myself on the receiving end of judging decisions. When the judging decisions fall your way, of course, the judges did a remarkable job. They were insightful. They clearly knew what they were doing. And when it doesn't, you might think, how did they get to that decision? How could that possibly have happened? Yeah? I had the experience of placing second in the World Championship of Public Speaking. I've had the experience of placing second at club level, second out of 2 speakers. So believe me, I've lived it, been there, got the T-shirt and the key ring and who knows what else. All right? So it's subjective. But on this day, to the best of our ability as a judging panel, and there's lots of discussion and consideration, and we went around the houses with all sorts of considerations, we have come to a decision, and this is with excitement, perhaps a little hint of trepidation, that I will now announce those results. All right? So, if I may ask each of the following individuals to come to the stage to receive your medal from Charles, Director General of the ESU. I'll announce the roles first, and then the winning team. The award for Best Chair in today's grand final goes to Jara Island. Congratulations. And do stay on stage and enjoy the moment. Okay, thank you, Jara. I think we're going to have a bit of a photo fest at some point, all right? Secondly, the role of questioner. And this award for Best Questioner goes to Lorenza Rees.
Thank you.
Many congratulations. Very well done. I should add, of course, Jara representing Churchill College and Lorenza representing Ibstock Place School. And the award for speaker, best speaker, goes to Tessa Hurdale. Very well done. Very well done.
Congratulations. Thank you.
And finally, the winners of this year's 2024 Churchill ESU public speaking competition, after a lengthy retirement and much discussion, goes to Ibstock Place. Very well done. And congratulations. Many congratulations to all award winners. And congratulations to the tablecloth for providing some impromptu entertainment. So I think we're going to have some photos. Charles, I don't know if there are any words you might like to say, because I feel like I have.
Thanks at the end. Are you done?
That's all good in terms of the awards for this competition. Let me just say, final note from my side as chair of the judges, on behalf of all of the judges, again, thank you so much for being a supportive audience. And I know that there will be a very considerable number of people in this room who will have played a huge role in supporting speakers on stage, speakers seated in the audience. And as I say, to each of you that has spoken, that has chaired, that has questioned, contests are never an end in themselves. They are an opportunity to learn. And I still remember a friend of mine from the professional speaking world who said, of course, that when it comes to trophies, the easiest and simplest way to secure a trophy actually is to buy one. What matters is the growth. And my hope is, sincere hope, that for each of you, as much as you will treasure the awards that you've justly earned today, that the learning, the experience on the journey you've had will stay with you. And for each of you that's spoken on this stage, it really is the most magnificent achievement. And I wish you the very best in all that you do and in your exams, and speak soon.
Some medals here for the winning team. Very good. You get a medal as well, another one. There you go.
Thank you.
Try not to bang your head with that. Well done, you're very good. And now you need to feel awkward because you get yet another one. Excellent, excellent. Well done. It's been a real pleasure to be here today, partly to be here representing the English-speaking union, but also to hear the extraordinary effective speeches that we've heard today. You've covered some of my favourite things, from Kant through to Barbie and the great Kennedy that came from that movie, which I love, through to Churchill and his courage. They were all really, really good. So thank you to the students for that. The ESU is an extraordinary organisation. You know better than anybody the impact it can have upon individual people's lives. But as we've heard earlier, the lever that we hold here today stretches all the way from here right up to the United Nations. We can actually shift the world and change things for the better through the skills that you've been practicing and developing here. It's a really exciting time. I had the job of giving the vote of thanks, and I'll run through a few of the organisations and people. Firstly, of course, to thank the Churchill Society for hosting us here and for their 8 years of sponsorship for this event. Thank you too to our branches, the ESU branches, who run the heats, who help us find the volunteer judges and who give their expert guidance and support. Thank you to the ESU heat leaders, and those volunteer judges, because we could not run this competition without you. Thank you to the semi-final judges and the final judges for all your expertise, the time, the investment that you make, and the good advice that you give, Simon particularly so. Thank you to the ESU staff. This is good work. We are really lucky to work for an organisation that has such an impactful purpose. So thank you for what you have done for us. Thank you particularly to the teachers. You set the inspiration and you provide the support. You set a spark and you fan flames that last for a long time. If I could go back and thank Janet Cockin and the teachers who did this for me, I would. Your influence and impact goes much wider and lasts much longer than perhaps even you realise. So thank you to all the teachers who actually drive this and make all of this possible. And finally, thank you to you, the students, for taking part in this. It has been an extraordinary thing to be part of and to watch. The English language is an extraordinary thing. The impact that you can have today can travel far because words are almost like living things. They can land lightly and they can hit hard. But when you speak in public, you have the capacity to shape and change the world and the people around you. It is almost the most powerful form of magic I can imagine. So when you leave here and go on your way, please remember to use your powers for good. Do not drive division, but bring people together to build friendship and understanding, because that is what the world needs now more than ever. So thank you everybody for coming, for giving up your Sunday or taking part. I hope you travel home safely, and I hope you come again next year. Thank you. Louis, who's taken time out of his important daytime job of podcasting and being a stand-up comedian to be here and act as our MC today. Louis, thank you.
Cheers. Wow, what else is there to say, really? Congratulations again to our winners over here. We'll have one final round of applause for our winners. Brilliant. What a day it has been, and thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you all next year.